Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective. Thank you all so much for sticking with me through all of these episodes as I continue to detail the journey of a father and a family and an organization going through the diagnosis of their sibling and their child of a rare form of brain cancer called choroid plexus carcinoma. Today, I'm going to talk about the protocol that she was given and the treatment plan that we were given and the timeline of which that happened and some things that are points of contention even today from the way she was treated to what we know now and the way we think maybe she should have been. Now, as I mentioned last week, we talked about her first initial hospital stay, which was roughly 12 days or roughly 2 weeks. When we would talk to her, she would always say, remember when we were in the hospital for 2 weeks? And it was roughly 2 weeks for us. We were in there on January 30th and we went home, I believe, on February 12th. So it was about 12 days. And after that initial stay, we left without a treatment plan. We left without knowing exactly what was going to happen next. Now, when they go through this type, at least with this type of tumor that we know, the couple of things that they check for are genetics. And out of genetics, we're looking for something called a TP53 gene mutation, and they're also looking for evidence of Lee-Fermini syndrome. Now, the gene mutation, again, it's just one of those things that makes you more susceptible to this type of cancer, to CNS cancers, which are brain tumors, and anything that has to do with the spine or the central nervous system. Lee-Fermini syndrome is something that is hereditary, and it's a predisposition to being to these types of cancers. Now, both of these tests for her were negative. So her being diagnosed with this form of brain cancer or any type of cancer was a complete and total shit luck situation. There was no reason for it. It was not dietary. It was not environmental. It was not hereditary, not genetic. It was just a complete shitty form of luck. And unfortunately, she was the one that was, I don't want to say chosen, but she was the one that this happened to. Now, CPC, or choroid plexus carcinoma, it's got two different types. There's CPP, which is a papilloma, and basically that's a benign tumor. So that's just a non-cancerous tumor that grows in the exact same spot as Jaycee's would, but once it's removed, there's a mere 100% survival rate because you've removed the mass. It's no longer creating a problem. It doesn't grow back. It doesn't require any further treatment and things like that. Now, her type of tumor was malignant, and it has got about a 60 to 65% survival rate after 100% removal, but that number varies depending on what source you're looking at. It also it depends on a lot. It depends on a child's genetics. It depends on their family history. It depends on a lot of things, but that number can fluctuate depending on that. And CPC itself only makes up 5% of all brain tumors. So there's not a really good understanding of CPC, why it happens, what factors can contribute to it, and how to really treat it. So there's no standard of protocol, standard of care for CPC. You are really throwing things at a wall, essentially, and seeing what fits. Now, the protocol for CPC specifically is surgery. Surgery is always first. They want to get the tumor, most of, if not all of it, removed. And your best chance of survival is to have 100% total resection. Jaycee did have 100% total resection, completely removed after 2 surgeries that I would say totaled probably 16 to 18 hours in total, removed everything. The next step would be radiation. In combination with chemotherapy, and then really the biggest opportunity for you there is in clinical trials. Now, clinical trials are probably going to be an entire new episode of me talking about why they're good, why they're bad, how you get into them, how completely exclusive they are, and how very difficult they are to be a part of, mainly because there's a very small window. And I'm going to say it as crude as I can because this is the way we viewed them in the past. Clinical trials, you can't be too sick, but you can't be too well. You have to be somewhere in the middle there where there's a possibility for improvement, but not so far into into the cancer, into the stages that it would make no difference at all and essentially be more detrimental. So there's a very small window of opportunity for you to be able to participate in clinical trials, but that is generally speaking, kind of the last step, the last opportunity. So when we left after those 2 weeks, we did not then yet have that protocol set up, have any type of treatment plan set up. And what we were waiting for is that TP53 gene mutation test and the Leber-Meany syndrome test. We had not received those yet, and before we left. So I remember going back to work after we got home. She essentially went back to school, and I went back to work, and we thought everything was really good because she was doing really well. She was feeling good. And I got a phone call that says, she tested negative for both of these tests, and which I thought, okay, that's a positive. Maybe there's a possibility that this isn't the malignant type of tumor. Maybe it's a possibility that it was benign. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It was obviously cancer. So the next step was for us to go back out to Milwaukee to sit down and have a treatment plan put together for us. And this treatment plan was something that our oncologist in Milwaukee had collaborated with sick kids in Canada, as well as one other hospital that I don't quite remember. It was either CHOP, which is Children's Hospital Philadelphia, or it was Seattle Children's, and I can't remember which one. But I know that he had collaborated with at least one other hospital to get this plan put together. Now, the initial plan was she would go through 30 rounds of radiation. So this was Monday through Friday. She would go in for radiation, and she would do this until those were done. And this would essentially end on May 12th. That's when she finished. So her 30 rounds of radiation were directed radiation, so it wasn't full body. And so she had a mask put on, which we still have here. And they basically strap you to the table. Now, for her, because of her age, they would put her to sleep for her radiation, so she wouldn't move around because you have to lay perfectly still. So they'd strap you to the table, and she had directed radiation right where the tumor was, and nowhere else. So nothing else in the body. And when they did this, the one part of her treatment that absolutely worked 100% was radiation, because nothing ever grew back in the spot where that tumor was, where they had radiated. So that was the plan for that. You get the 30 rounds of radiation, and as soon as that's done, we're going to get you going with your 5 rounds of chemo, and that will be your plan. And then after that, you reevaluate. Now, obviously, there's a lot of testing, MRIs, CTs, and things that happen during all of this treatment, because that's part of it, to kind of track how things are going. Now, we got through that 30 rounds of radiation, and she did it like a champ. Like, she would come home from these, and then she would just go outside and play. There was really no side effects when it came to radiation. The only thing that I would say, and even this was about, it wasn't right in the beginning, it was towards the end when the patches of hair would start to fall out where she was having the radiation. But otherwise, there was really no side effects that she ever had from it. So we did that, and at the very end of the radiation, what we did was the doctor came in and we chatted, and like I said, they would do tests all the time. They would also check her spinal fluid, they would check her blood, and they would do MRIs and things like that. And what they were looking for is tumor growth, and they were also looking for cancer cells in the spinal fluid or anywhere else in her body, because this was a CNS cancer, which means it flushes through the brain and through the spinal fluid and the spine. That's why a lot of times it will spread to the spine and other parts of your body. Now, from the time she had her very first CT and MRI when she was in Milwaukee during diagnosis up until the end of this radiation, so you're talking from January 30th until May 12th, she never had a test positive for cancer cells in her spinal fluid, ever. Never had them tested near her spine or anywhere else in her body. There was no other tumors. It was only that one, and she never had a positive test otherwise. So at the end of this radiation, she was essentially, and I've talked about the difference between NED, no evidence of disease or cancer-free. And at the end of this radiation, she was NED. There was no evidence of tumor. There was no evidence of cancer cells. There was nothing. So the decision was made in corroboration with her hospital in Green Bay and Milwaukee, and then they also corroborated with CHOP that she did not need chemo, because at that point, there was no reason for it. There was no necessity to do anything, because she wasn't showing any signs of anything happening. As a matter of fact, it was showing that everything that had been done up until that point had worked. This will be the first point of contention that I was speaking about. This is a difference between, did we do the right thing by not doing chemo here? Now, my wife will say, and listen, there's no right or wrong answer here, and I'm not saying that I disagree with her at all. She will say she kind of wishes to a point that we just would have gone ahead with the chemo, just gone ahead like we had done before. And listen, maybe it would have made a difference, but we have no way to know that. My thing has always been, we didn't do it because she felt so good. There's a flip side of that, and I'll get to it. But we didn't do it because she felt so good. So essentially, even if you take it only from May until September, which is when she relapsed, that those 4 months were beautiful for her. They were fantastic. No doctors, no testing, no sticks, no nothing. She was just a happy kid. We were still following up on things, but she wasn't facing any horrible things at that point. No horrible testing, horrible chemo, side effects. Everything was going well. So for me, I look at it and say she got 4 incredible months that she didn't have to worry about anything. But at the same time, like I said, there's a flip to that. At the same time, you look at it and say, when she did finally go in and start chemo, she was very weak and she was very much frail already and starting to lose body mass and things like that. And when she stopped her radiation, she had a lot more to her that maybe would have been able to fight the chemo or accept the chemo better and have her not get so sick. But again, there's no way for us to know that. This is just a shot in the dark, trying to understand exactly why it didn't work or why it could have worked. And again, there's another point to that later on. So we did all of this stuff, and then on September 11th of 2020, this is the date that she actually relapsed, or this is the date that the relapse was discovered. She woke up, didn't feel good, couldn't keep her head up straight. Actually was kind of, was leaning and she just couldn't stand it up straight. She just couldn't do it. It was like her equilibrium was off, her balance was off, and she was getting sick. So I ended up having to take her to the emergency room that night, or that early morning. We called our doctor early in the morning, and we got over there, and they were going to do an MRI, and she ended up getting sick before she went in, so they had to wait and give her some medication to calm her down, and then finally they were able to do it. What they were looking for was hydrocephalus. Now, at that point, there was nothing. So when we got the testing back, they said there's no hydrocephalus. Maybe she just caught something. She's got a weakened immune system, so maybe, she caught a bug. Okay, so we get her home, and it just continues to keep happening and happening. She's sick. Every day she's getting sick. She's still in good spirits, but she's just not feeling well. She can't eat. She's not being able to be a kid and do what she needs to do. So we end up, continuing to call, kind of letting them know what's going on. And then we got a phone call from one of the oncologists in Green Bay that said, listen, we've gone over 100 slides of him or her MRI. And on one slide, we were able to see about a pencil eraser size growth on the base of her brainstem. It's, and they at that point said she's relapsed, and we need to get her started on our thing is we need to get her started on chemo right now, to potentially, kind of cut this off and hit it up now before it gets any worse. Because at that point, it's an inoperable space in Europe. They can't go in and do anything around that area. So we said, okay. I remember being there. I remember telling my wife about it. I remember telling her sisters about it, and me breaking down. And I remember, asking Jayce, are you okay? And she said, no, I'm scared. And I think we were all scared, but we kind of geared up for what we knew what was coming. So at that point, we were in the process still of getting her Make-A-Wish done. So we reached out to them to say, we need to get it done, now, because she's going to be starting chemo on this day. So we need to get things going. So we ended up getting her Make-A-Wish done the day before she started chemo. And then what would happen was that I would take her, we'd go to the hospital, we'd get all checked in. And so what they're going to do is when her radiation was finished, they took her port out. She had a port put in that they would access for her medicine, her anything like that. And they took that out after chemo or after radiation, because at that point we thought we were done with treatment. Now, after that, once we get in there to start with chemo, they have to put something back in so they can give her medication, they can give her chemo, they can give her all of that. So they end up putting in something called a Hickman catheter, which is just 2 lumens or just 2 wires, tubes that hang out of the chest that they can, they can put in the medicine and they can hook it up to the IVs and things like that. And therefore, they can also take blood, so that eliminates her having to get, blood draws and getting stuck with needles all the time. So we get in for that first chemo, and when we get in for that first chemo, it is probably the scariest thing since all of it that I've been through with her and my wife's been through. This was probably the scariest time ever. And that's because they ended up giving her basically saline. They give her fluid so that she can be bulked up and ready to go before she goes in for surgery. To have this and to have the chemo, they want to have you good and hydrated. But what the problem was is the solution was not correct. And so it ended up sending her sodium level to a point that was so bad that she almost went into seizures because the sodium level was so bad. So what was happening is she was getting sick, but there was nothing in her body, so she wasn't throwing up. She just would she would sit up like she was going to throw up. And it got to the point where she, again, went into that stage where she just kind of went limp. Her body, she couldn't keep her head up. She couldn't stand up. She could talk to you like she was there. It wasn't affecting her mentally, but she just could not do anything for herself. So what happened was that turned into a real emergency situation because we were trying to figure out what was going on, and they figured out that it was the sodium levels and that they needed to get it fixed right away. So they got new stuff mixed up for her, and they ran it in at just wide open speed, and within a few hours, you could tell she turned around real fast. She started to feel better. She started to talk to me. She started to be able to just be herself, and you could tell she was coming around. So that we were basically pushed her chemo back in almost an entire day that first time. We got her into a brand new room because they wanted us to be closer to the nurse's station. And then that's when we started the chemo. We said, okay, she's been bulked up now. She's feeling better. We're going to get this chemo started. So the chemo they were going to start it off. They start with the ifosfamide. Now, these chemos, or this ICE is set up as a Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma type of protocol. So the cocktail of drugs is meant to treat those types of cancers. Now, I don't know exactly why it was chosen as the best course of action for Jaycee, but it was. And there's not a whole lot I can say about it now, but that's what was set up as her protocol. So when we get going on this chemo, what ends up happening is it goes in over a relatively long, but not. It was, I forget. I want to say it went in over 4 to 6, or maybe it was 6 hours, but it would go in over a course of time. So it wasn't just pushed; it would just go in over a course of time. And come the end of that treatment, or end of that drug going in, what I would notice is that she would be completely unresponsive. She would look at you, but it was like there was nobody home. It was like she was staring at you and you were looking at her, but there was just nobody there. And you'd ask her a question and she would not answer you, and she would not respond to you. She couldn't move. She couldn't do anything. And what this ended up happening is it would happen over a 12-hour period. So for 12 solid hours, she would be in this locked in the box situation, is what I would call it. And it was scary because she couldn't communicate. She couldn't get up to go to the bathroom. So she was wetting the bed. It was very, very scary because it was like she was just there in a vegetative, not catatonic, because she would still look you in the eyes. And it was like she wanted to communicate with you, but she just couldn't get words out. And then what would happen is that 12 hours later, she would just sit up, or she would look at you and she wouldn't remember what had happened, but it was like it was like nothing had ever happened. And she would talk to you and everything was great. And it was very, very scary and very, very, very hard to really, really get a grasp on what was going on. And then so the other 2 drugs that went in, it was like no big deal. There was no issues, no side effects, no anything. And I remember the first time her trying to get out of bed so that she could go to the bathroom, because what they would do after the chemos went in is that they would fill you full of fluids until it flushed the rest of the chemo out of you. And the first time she went to get up to go to the bathroom, her legs completely collapsed from out from under her. And now, luckily, I was helping her out of bed, so I had her, but her legs give out, and she's completely freaked out and scared by this. And of course, so am I, wondering, what is happening? Is this what she's going to have to go through, for essentially 5 months until for her to potentially feel better? Because this is horrible. And so we did this twice, and then the second time we went in for chemo, we did it again. But they had added something called methylene blue, which was supposed to counteract the side effects. It did nothing. As a matter of fact, I think it actually made it worse. And what it did was this methylene blue kind of gave her what I would call tremors or just irrational body movements. I mean, she would just be sitting on the bed, and she would just be shaking, kind of like she just almost like you're shivering, or you get your muscle just spasms or something like that. And at one point she actually literally sat up. It was so intense. And so that was it. So those 2 rounds, and then the one with the methylene blue, I said, that's not working. We've got to come up with a different plan, because I can't put her through this 3 more times. It's just not going to work. So what they ended up doing was they switched it to something called CCE, which is the same drugs, except they replaced the ifosfamide with cisplatin. And when they did the cisplatin and the carboplatin and the etoposide, what it did was it almost made chemo a breeze. She didn't have any side effects. She didn't feel sick. She actually would sit and talk to me, and we'd play games and watch YouTube, and it was actually really much a breeze. There was no issues with it. And the only bad time was, I believe, it was right before Christmas. It might have been right before Christmas that I remember that we went in, and they were going to send us home a day earlier than they had planned, because she was feeling good and everything was great. But the problem is she hadn't gotten hydrated enough. So when we went home, she was still extremely dehydrated and ended up getting really sick. We had to go back in the next day and basically sit there for 12 hours while she was hooked up to fluids to make sure that she was going to be okay. She ended up, getting through that, and we went home and everything was good. But it's something that was so delicate that just dehydration was enough to really kind of put her backwards. And that's how far off her immune system was at that point. And it was very scary, but she, again, fought like a champ, and everything came out really well on that front anyway. But, the other point of contention, what really comes down to it, is when she had her stem cell transplant. So this will just kind of jump ahead just a little bit, but when she had her stem cell transplant, and that was a 40-day stay, plus, when she went back home and we had to go back the next day, she ended up for another 12 days because of a focal seizure that she had, that just kind of came out of nowhere with no warning. And when it did that, we essentially got stuck there for that 12 days, and, they thought it was a shunt failure. And that shunt failure was revised twice while we were there, trying to get things to work correctly so that it would drain the fluid off of her brain. And that was supposed to help bring swelling down that was causing her to essentially be in a catatonic state for more than a week, which is, I don't have to tell anybody that that's probably the hardest thing ever, to look at your child and have them every now and again just look at you, and you not know if they know who you are, or if they know what's going on, or where they are, or if you're going to be able to leave the hospital with them. And that was an extremely tough time. And I remember calling my wife and saying, I don't know if we're going to come home. But I know when they told us what was going on, and they took, what they ended up doing from the shunt is they took samples of her spinal fluid, and they sent it off. And then I got the report back, because I was, everything is done through an app now. So I was able to get the report and read the report. And what it showed was that there was evidence of cancer cells in her spinal fluid, which again was the very first time this has ever happened with her. Even from diagnosis day up until now, there had never been evidence of anything in her spinal fluid. And so now it's showing evidence of it in her spinal fluid, and this is right after her stem cells, which that's supposed to just wipe you completely out and start over. And unfortunately, I think what it did is it just reactivated and angered the tumor. And it also showed something called leptomeningeal disease, which is essentially a side effect of these CNS cancers, and there's no cure for it. There's really no treatment for it. But depending on when you catch it, you can manage it, but there's no way to cure it or treat it. And the one thing that when you read about this and you read about CPC and CNS tumors, this was another point of contention. When she was given these chemos or this chemo plan that was set up for her, and then when I went in to get the stem cells, what I learned about the drugs, the chemo drugs that she was on during her stem cell transplant, is that those drugs would actually break through the blood-brain barrier. And this was the first time I had ever heard about a blood-brain barrier. I had no idea what it was. The blood-brain barrier is essentially a wall, honestly, between the base of your brain and everything else in your body. That means that everything is being flushed into your body through your port, through your a central line for your chemos and stuff like that. It's not breaking that barrier and going up to the area where the cancer was. And so a lot of these CNS tumors and with leptomeningeal disease, they treat it through something called intrathecal chemo, which is essentially them injecting the chemo directly into your spinal fluid, either through a port in your back or a reservoir that they put directly in the top of your head, in that ventricle, and then they inject the chemo right into that area, which to me seems logical. The contention comes because that was never an option to us. That was never given to us as an option or even something that we would have thought about. Because like I said, there is no protocol and there is nothing along those lines for CPC. So just searching CPC when she was first diagnosed gave us nothing about intrathecal, about ICE, about CCE, didn't give us any of that. It literally tells you that the protocol is surgery, chemo, radiation, clinical trials. That's it. You will get some articles about certain types of clinical trials that have gone on. You'll get some articles about different types of radiation that are used, but really there's nothing out there saying this is a protocol, that we would use. But I had no idea about this blood-brain barrier situation, because what that told me is that all the chemo she was given through her port in that hospital that made her into put her in a vegetative state, or that made her not be able to stand up or speak to me, and put her in a position that really took away everything that made her, that none of that chemo did anything. None of that chemo made a difference, because it wasn't getting to the areas that were meant to, or that were causing the cancer or making it worse or were making it spread. When I brought up intrathecal chemo, before she went in for stem cells, we were basically told that it wasn't an option anymore, because at that point she had shunts in her body. So if they put the intrathecal chemo in, the shunts would flush everything out. So it would wash it all away. There'd be no point in it. So I didn't know this was an option. And had I known that it was an option, I'm not saying that it would have made a difference. We have no idea. But every single person that we've come in contact with who's had a child with CPC, their treatment plans have been 100% different. We have never met another family that has used ICE or CCE as their treatment plan for CPC. We've never found another one. We've seen other protocols, we've seen other things, and we've seen good and bad results. So there is no right or wrong here, and there's no one that's going to work for everybody, because everybody's biology is different, everybody's body type is different, your ages are different. There's a lot of factors that go into why certain things will work. But I guess that point of contention is that we never understood why we were never given the option to direct the chemo directly where it needed to go. That would have made the most sense to me, but it was just never an option. But again, we will never understand whether or not that would have made a difference, or whether it would have made it worse, or whether starting chemo right after radiation would have changed anything, or if it would have drawn things out, or if it would have made it worse. We just don't know any of that. But like I said, this this type of cancer just doesn't have enough research, doesn't have enough, it doesn't have enough data. It doesn't have the data bank or the database, and it doesn't have the scientists and the doctors and the researchers that are really focusing on it. And we hope one day, through what we're trying to do now and what with our next plan of action is, that I'm hoping that we can get together. What we're trying to do now is create a brain tissue and rare tissue data bank and database here in Wisconsin that may be able to get that one person that's eager enough, that wants to take the road less traveled by and research these types of cancers and these types of brain tumors that are not getting research and are not getting answers, and maybe it only takes one person. It takes one person, one experiment, one researcher, one bright-eyed new student, somebody that just wants to, do the different thing. When I was in high school, everybody took Spanish class. Everybody took Spanish because you had to take 2 years of Spanish in order to get into college. I took French because I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing. That wasn't me. I still to this day am the same way. I don't follow anybody else's lead. I march to the beat of my own drum, and I do what I want to do because I don't want to be everybody else. I want to be me. That's the same thing that I instill in my kids. Just be yourself. Do what you want to do. Be different. And that's what I'm hoping, is that by creating something like this and creating opportunities, that it will create a spot for that one person that doesn't want to follow the path of everybody else, doesn't want to study one thing, wants to find that rarity, that one that nobody's looking at, and that's what they want to make their mission. And I'm hoping to find that. So I'm going to cut it here, and I'm hoping that there's sound on this episode so I can actually upload it. We will continue talking about, we're kind of going through, I went back to day 0 last week, and this is talking about her treatment protocol and everything she was supposed to go through and everything she did go through. And we will talk more in depth about her stem cell transplant and the drugs that were used in that on one of the next episodes here. And I'll also speak more in depth on clinical trials, as well as some of the other types of statistics and numbers about CPC and things like that, and try and get a little bit more in depth on those types of things. I know that I've already done episodes detailing the drugs for ICE and for CCE, so I will focus on her stem cell transplant. But again, if anybody has any questions or any concerns, anything that you want me to talk about, anything that maybe you're curious about, I and my family are open books, and we are more than happy to tell you this, or more than happy to talk about it, because the more people that hear it, the more people that maybe want to get involved and want to advocate, or you just want to be knowledgeable about what's going on, and you can help in your own way. So if you have any questions or concerns, please leave comments in the videos. I will post, obviously this video will be up on YouTube, and the audio version will be on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher. It'll be on Amazon Music. It'll be on iHeartRadio. So anywhere you listen to your podcast, you can download it there. So just remember, everybody, just make sure you're listening, make sure you're sharing, make sure you're subscribing, and make sure you continue to advocate always. And I'll see you next week.